Okay, so good afternoon. So my name is Jan Masschelein. I'm coming from Leuven, from Belgium. And I have to give an introduction because I have to start with an apology, to apologize because I changed a little bit the protocol. And this has to do with the fact that, as you know how these things go, you are asked, it's 4 or 5 months ago that you have been asked to present something, and then you say, okay, we will do this. And then you really start to think about it when you, when the thing is coming close, and then it's maybe, so I changed it. I kept one part of the title, so trying to think what we see and not to see what we think, which is a quote from a French philosopher, Henri Bergson. So, and I think it's interesting because it's about trying, so not to see true concepts, but to make a distinction between seeing and thinking. So trying to see and then to think, and we will do something or try something like that. And I changed the. So no, maybe I can say what I first wanted to do was to start from a small remark from Jacques Rancière in the Fables of Cinema. That was also the title, the Fable of the Cinema. It's a comment on a film by David Cronenberg on Crash. But that's not important, in fact, because what he's saying is that there are 2 ways. He says we can speak about film, but also, in fact, about everything that is made, he says. And there are 2 ways. So one is starting from the intention of the one who made, or the ones who made something, and then we can try to compare what is made with the intentions. So it's a kind of comparison between the work and the intentions of the makers. That's one way. The other way, he says, is to forget all this. It's not about, we forget the intentions and what the makers want, and we look. We look what there is to see, and we make our own fable. And that is what he's saying, is we're making our own fable. We take the shots, and we imagine our own fable that connects the shots, or that relates the shots. Now, this is related, and I was a little bit surprised. I thought that, so the group that you had this morning, so I said, I talked about, not very long, about the ignorant schoolmaster of Jacques Rancière, but apparently that's not really known. So I thought everybody would know that in this context, but that is not the case. So Jacques Rancière is a French philosopher who wrote a book that, it was already in the 80s, 87, which was called Le Maître Ignorant, the ignorant schoolmaster, about a schoolmaster who was ignorant and nevertheless said that he could teach everyone everything. And he could do that, he said, because there was a kind of imperative. He started from the equality of intelligences, and there was a kind of imperative that he was using, and it's very, very simple in a way. So it's saying, so look, say what you see, and then tell me also what you think about what you see. That's all. This kind of so the ignorant schoolmaster was the one who tried to keep everybody attentive, so to create a field of attention by this imperative. So look, tell me what you see, and then what you think about what you see. And so the idea there is to create, you could say, this field of attention, and so not intention, but attention. In order not to recognize in what we see what we already know. Yes. So I thought to start from there and to do a kind of exercise with a piece of a fragment out of a movie. But then I thought that maybe it was too much of an exercise, and maybe a little bit too little experimentation. So I changed my mind and said maybe I have to rethink this. And so I took this idea of education as experimentation. And for me, I translated education in university education. And university education for me is about gathering to study. And as Tyson has a very, very happy formulation about what study is, that it is a profanated learning, so it is a learning without end, so study. So it's a gathering to study that is in a way that is embodied and also technically arranged. But for me, it is university study is always a collective and public study. And I think that's an important thing. And in order to have this collective and public study, what university study is about, I think, is trying to give something the force to make us think. So how to give something the force to make us think, and this implies, first of all, try to make it appear, so that there is something that is not, and something that is not to be reduced to our intention or to our projects, but that can become an object, in the strong sense of an object of thinking, in the sense that it is objecting the projecting, so that it gets the power to object my intentions and my projections. So it is about making something appear and giving it the force that it can make us think, can make us see, can make us think. And that is related, I think, to creating an experimental condition. So to see something, to think something, has very little to do with creative minds and innovative minds, or whatever you want to call them. So that is something in my head or in your head. But that it is about trying to create conditions where something can appear, and where we can be exposed to that something. And let me say a few more things about this experimental, because I think it's important to distinguish between experimental and between experiment and exploration. So to make a distinction. So the experimental, you could say, has to do with trying to disclose what we do not know, but in the strong sense. So that means that we don't know what we don't know. So that's the strong. So we try to disclose what we don't know that we don't know. Yes. So don't know what that we don't know, but it is something. It is something where we have a kind of, and I'm hesitating for the right English word, but it's that we have a kind of suspicion, or a kind of, I think the better word is probably presumption. I think so it's not a hypothesis, because a hypothesis would already be, I know, because I can make an hypothesis. But there is something. There is something in this, what is happening here, and I cannot grasp it, I cannot find it, but there is something there. There is something. So when I try to arrange, experimentation is to make it speak, to make it appear, that we have it. So exploration, you could say, has to do with a strange world, but with a world that we know as strange. So the exploration is, so to say, to explore the known unknown. Yes, it is that what we experience as a kind of strange world, and that we want to explore. So, but the experiment, or the experimental way of doing, is about not so much about the strange or the unfamiliar, but in a sense, precisely about the opposite, that is, it looks very familiar, but we have the feeling that we miss something. So it seems everything seems to be there, we seem to understand it, but we do not understand it. So so the experimental has to do with trying to get that out. And it is, so in a way you could say it is trying to make that thing in a very broad sense, to communicate or to speak, so to make the unknown communicate. So, which is this thing of becoming an object or an objection, also in that sense. And in that sense, we have to try also to make ourselves receptive, to be able to receive, so to say, the communication. And this making receptive, you could say, is to try to get us out of the center, yes, to decenter ourselves. So intention and projection is something that is from going from, I am the center, so to say, I go out. So it is about trying to decenter. And this has to do in experimentation, in contradiction or in difference, you could say, from exploration. It is not so much about displacement, it is not so much about space, going to the strange world on the other side of the world, or whatever, to go to this place. It's not space, but it's rather something to do with time. It has to do with repetition, with iteration. So the experimentation is about repeating and iterating very often the same kind of things in order and make maybe very small adjustments and try to get something out of that. So that's a different thing to do. And so the experimentation is to try to create conditions that this can appear, that it can become something that something start to speak. The conditions you can call, very classically, you can call them laboratory conditions. But laboratory, it's interesting that laboratory is, so if you go to the French laboratoire, so it has two origins. So one is mostly referring to the workshop of the chemists. So the chemists that bring things together in order for something new to come about, or to the workshop of the artists. So the notion of laboratoire was in fact related to this context, and it had to do with setting up a test, you could say, a kind of essay, in order to catch something. So like a fishnet or like a trap in some sense. So to try to catch something, to also in the sense of now I can see, now I can catch it, I can have it in some sense. And so to make something emerge, and so to create conditions, to create a kind of situation in which this can happen. And this always implies a kind of exteriorization. That means something has to be made present in order, or materialized, externalized. Something must be there that we can work with and that can relate to. It requires not so much, and I think that the symposium that has been set up is a very good example of this. So that experimentation is not referring to method. So method is always something that is going somewhere. It has a kind of telos or a kind of aim or where you go to. Yes. So the method is the way to get there, but it is related to protocols. And protocols are, you could say, profanated methods. they are methods without a goal, and the aim is not to get somewhere, but to expose yourself. So that's a different kind of. So it's related to, and for me, this protocol in the context of an experiment is related to a kind of repetition very often, or or end, to all kinds of limitations and constraints. So you have to, and I suppose, I don't know what your backgrounds are, but if you are all in the backgrounds of art and art education, you will know that constraining, limiting is a very important element. So also for experiments, there is a kind of limitation in order to create a kind of attention, and also in French, again, in English, the notion of attention is relating also to attending. So attending means meeting something, to meet something. But in French, attendre is also about waiting. It is also to wait for something. So to be attention is to suspend the intentions and try to see whether something can communicate. So it implies also not so much a kind of critical distance. It is not about getting at a critical distance, but you could call it to get, in a certain sense, to a certain experimental intimacy. An experimental intimacy to something and some situation, whereby it is, I think, important also, and it maybe will not sound as I thought it would sound, because I use this notion of the ignorant, but so it is also to make yourself ignorant. But ignorant meaning different from the ignorant schoolmaster, so to say. So the ignorance is not a kind of natural situation, but it is something that you create. You create a kind of, try to create a kind of ignorance in order to be able to receive something. So that for the experimentation. Now I just going to say a few things, 2 sentences about the concrete protocol that I would propose to for the session, for the further session, and that is and I will make use of that. That is something that Brian Masumi, which maybe you might know from the Sense Lab in Montreal. What he called it, it was a kind of protocol that he developed out of what he said, the frustration of the difficulty to truly think together in the moment. So he said to try to have a kind of collective thinking in the moment. So in the way he worked with students and all, he said, I'm very often frustrated because we are just getting to some conversation and not to collective thinking. And he's quoting Gilles Deleuze, who said that conversation is the most important enemy of thought. Yes, conversation is that what is preventing us from thinking, so to say. At least conversation as very often happened, he says in seminars or when we gather, is that it becomes an exchange of opinions and ideas. And so that is not a kind of collective thinking, that is the conversation, that is a conversation that is precisely preventing collective thought. So that's not what he wanted. And so he wanted to try to have a kind of collective thinking which could not be ascribed to individual actors taken separately or even in an aggregate form, but also could not arise without them. So to create conditions for this collective thinking, to create what you could call, and that's not what Masumi is saying, but to create a kind of movement, a movement of thought. And he developed for that something, like a protocol, what he called conceptual speed dating. And so it was about reading a text, reading a text, but in a way that we are also going to do, not exactly the same, so I'll adapt it a little bit, so that we are also going to try to do that, but not with concepts, but with images, at least to some extent with images. And he said about this conceptual speed dating, so we have to try, if we want to do that, we have to use a text, which is a text which we assume that can generate some thinking, but we look, he said, to the minor concepts. So not to big concepts like I and we and as far as you can say that is a concept, but not to the big general concepts, but to small minor things that very often you don't even recognize. So that is what he wanted to do. So I'm using this inspiration to in a certain way to abuse you. So I don't know if I have to go out now, because I know that in American context it's very sensitive sometimes. But so I'm going to abuse you in the following sense that we are in Leuven, not only in Leuven, in many places, I think, interested in, one of the things that we are interested in is what is happening to schools when we introduce all these digital devices. Yes, what is happening to school? What is happening there? And I mean by digital, I mean the three things you could say. The digital is related to the screen, it is related to the internet and to algorithms. So that, if I say digital, in fact, it's the three elements. I'm not going to separately discuss them now. So the three elements. So what happens to schools when these kind of devices enter the school? And so we have some people that are doing PhD about this, and one of the students that is hopefully also going to come to Denton to hear, Samira, you know, so she will probably come here. So she is trying to deal with that issue, and she has been doing during 3 months kind of ethnographic research in a school, where she has made a lot of recordings and also photographs and film recordings. In a school, which is an international school, you will see, I will show you some things, which is an international school, which explains why they speak English, because it's in Belgium. Normally you don't speak English in Belgium, but so they speak English, and this is a school that choose to go radically for the idea. Everybody, how is it called? Bring your own device. That's so everybody has to bring their own device, and in fact they tried to get rid of most of the written things and of the books, so really use the device. And so she has been there for 3 months. She had made all kinds of footing. So but the thing is that we have the suspicion of the presumption that something is happening. That is happening today, you bring it in, so that something is happening. But what? What is it that is going on there? What are the? How can we describe? How can we say what is going on? How can we? So, if you first want to see before you think, or to relate think and seeing. So, what is there to see, and how can we think about what there is to see? And so she is involved in that, and she's not the only one. And so it's evolving around two pairs of concepts, so to say, very self-evident to some extent. So the one is attention and distraction. The other is isolation and gathering. Yes, these are, so to say, concepts that we use. But as I said, if we, in a certain way, if you use these concepts, you already start to see what you think. Yes, think about the quote, you see what you think. So I will just give another example to make clear what I mean. So, because in other contexts, when I work with students in cities where they go around and have all kinds of observations that they make, and it's very often in post-conflict cities. And so when first evening when we talk to these students, they say, we have seen a lot of poverty today. That's, I think, a very good example, because you cannot see poverty. Poverty is a concept. It's a concept. So you have to tell me what you see, not what you think that you see. So, so just to make it clearer, hopefully, what I mean. So if you use these notions, isolation, gathering, attention, distraction, you seem already to imply, or could be that you too much already make it impossible that other things could be seen, and that you could have other things. Also, Samira is thinking about the possibility that distraction itself is, in fact, a way of being attentive, and that maybe attention, what we call attention, is maybe a way of distraction, and so on. Yeah, okay. That's just the context. So why now I'm saying that I'm going to abuse you? Because I would like to propose a protocol that we are going to look to some of the footage, and I want to invite you in some way to try to find out what we see. What is there to see? What is happening? What is happening there? So that is what I will propose. So what I will show you. So we have it's a video of 9 minutes, but I will show you. I will begin with 4 minutes, something like 4 minutes that we will look at. And as I said, it are minor images, so it's not a movie. It's not made as a movie. There is no spectacle in it. It's a very minor, so to say. It's also not really, how you say, there is no real montage or something like that. It's put one after the other, so it's not very constructed. Of course, there is always a kind of perspective involved and so on, but nevertheless, it's very, very simple. So I would like. So we are going to watch that on the big screen here, and then I would ask you to sit in 2 rows. So one to one. Yes. I'm going to ask you then during 5 minutes to talk. So we look together to the movie or to the images. Then you sit like that, 2 to 2, and I ask you. So this question, so what is there to see? What is there to think? A very simple question. And to write some things down, but to be very careful to try to say what you see first, before you immediately go either into a kind of judgment or in using too quickly all kinds of concepts in order to say what you see. Yes, to try. So therefore I ask you to start always, or try as much as possible to start the conversation also as I saw in the video. Yes? As I saw in the video. So try to always make this point. So you get 5 minutes, and then we shift. So one row remains the same, and the other row shifts. So you are going on another date. And so it's from one date to the other. So we have a few of these repetitions that we repeated, and then at one moment I will show you also. I think this morning I showed the same video again. So now I think the same part of the video again. I think now I will. So I'm sorry, I am abusing you. So because it's an experimentation, so I'm going to ask you to look at the second part of the. So not to re-look at, but to look at the second part. I want you also to write down some words, some words which you think you can use to say something about what you see and what you think. Is that clear? Okay, so it's really a kind of trying out whether we can see something and find words to say something that is maybe not so simple as attention and distraction and as isolation and gathering. Because that is what we feel, that we miss something. That this is not enough for saying what, or not right enough to say what there is going on in this place.
Okay, I did.
It went back
I wrote
to
this
75.
down. Because else he would have to go to the
we're waiting just for Arthur to
principal.
write
Yeah,
his
Arthur.
answer. Okay, Arthur, can you just type something quickly, please?
It's not listening.
Go with that.
I did because else he would have to go to the principal.
Listen to what happens.
This led to a full-scale investigation, and I was removed from the house for 3 days. So they finally decided to ask how I got the bruises.
Okay, I don't want to discuss this at all. I want you guys to. Why was Shane taken away from his grandma's house?
Oh,
Just write the answer.
because
Why was he taken?
I'm out. Leave the speech.
Slideshow, the most funny, popular, cool math games ever.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you are finished, you can exit and then pack up and you can go to your next class.
Yeah, well, just like
Well, this is actually my favourite slide. It's really lovely colour, and you've got a really nice picture of the Minecraft. It's actually one of my favourite slides. Very, very good. Right, Jan, should I choose anybody else?
I got a question. It's my favorite video game is Minecraft, but why did you put like a capital letter for Minecraft? Just it's the name of the game.
Good question. Good answer.
Another question.
Yeah.
What's your most favorite thing to do in Minecraft? I think it's kill.
Okay, one more question.
I have one. Giannis, I want you to sit in the back, still stand in the back of the room.
You want to go back?
She doesn't read
What do you think?
What's that
No,
square?
I cannot read that.
I cannot read that thing.
What does it say after my food? Can you read it easily?
No. Yes.
Right.
Right.
Let's start. Anyway, you can don't try anymore. I think you have a lot of that. We're gonna try and find the simplest one.
I'm trying to use one.
Yeah.
No, I want baby Jack. No, I got a baby.
So we're gonna press. Rupen, are you with us? That's what I'm saying. Just to follow.
Okay.
Unicorn, unicorn, unicorn.
Tiger.
Unicorn. Yes, we're
I
never was a unicorn.
Well, because we're together. Oh, I'm switching.
Can I go there? I need to go there. Yes, I'm a tiger, please.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I thought he was an art team.
You ready?
Yes.
Last go.
Right. Washing. This is I know what it is. We're won. We're winning. That's not for. I think it was facial. Imagery, yeah. Facial. Come on, we need to do it. Frozen. Washing. Yeah. Washing. No. It's metaphor. You have that one.
It's a picture in your mind.
Imagery. Metaphor, yeah. Chocolate.
Come on.
Maybe it was like
Juice. Orange.
No!
How can you do that? No. The bar was so slippery. No. This number is
Okay, we lost.
Yeah!
Well done.
So I just recall, so you have about 5 minutes. I will say stop when it is 5 minutes over, and then you shift. We take this row. So if you want to go, then there, and the others go there. And just not forget to say, as we saw, as I saw in the video. So try to really relate to the images. Of course, it's a recollection that is true, but nevertheless, try to keep to the images.
But yeah, the devices is a lot.
Kind of still in this, you know.
Different spaces.
Yeah, like here, they might